damn cool they were, how bold they were, how rebellious they were to have just landed here and said, I don't care. You know, middle fingers up in the air, like this is who I am, this is who I want to be. I don't want to be like the white kids at school. I don't want to be like my parents. I'm not going to listen to them, and I'm going to do me. And I think that's what really made me more emboldened and proud to continue to do the work.
I just want to add, I mean, the photo archive that you created around this, the collection of it is incredible. And for people who aren't already following Elizabeth, the New Wave documentary on Instagram, and she posts a lot of those images as part of her event posts, and as a compendium of just images of us, right? I mean, I'm not Vietnamese American, but of Asian American young people, which we so rarely see elsewhere, to your point. What an amazing archive you put together there. So I just want to give you kudos for that.
And I want to give a shout out back to whoever's in this room who, you know, you're doing this work too if you're on social media and saving things about your own lives, but this project was a community effort, and I could not have done it without the archivists, my advisors, and hundreds of just everyday people and fans that shared their photos with me. So a lot of it, I want to say like 2/3 of the archives were crowdsourced on Instagram.
I'm glad, Oliver, you brought up the photos because, right, like thinking Asians are cool. we are cool. We can be innovative, you know, and the part where your aunt is dressing you up and putting you in the Supra, and I feel like that really resonated. I remember being 10 and my cousins older getting their hair going to a party. I'm like, can I please come with you? Like, no, you're 10 years old, you're staying home. But I love this idea that you talk about rebellion, and maybe you can talk about that more. Like, how is rebellion important in terms of not only your own personal experience, but as a culture?
Well, I was saying that earlier, is that every generation has their own rebellion, right? We look at this and you're like, oh, those weird Viet kids when you look at it. But if you just keep looking back at the punks, at the people who are, you know, listening to rock and roll and then listening to jazz, they were all rebels. They were all doing something that the mainstream, the status quo, said this is not okay. This is the devil's music, right? You're gonna go to hell for listening to this, or whatever it was at that time. So I think that this film may look like a time capsule and a look back, but it's very urgent right now, right? We want to see rebellion. We want people to resist. We want people to speak up. We want them to be different. We want them to say, I reject what you say is, you know, these policies and all of that. And you can do it through making a zine. You can do it through, you know, writing essays, posting on social media. You don't have to make an entire movie, but make a movie too. Why not?
You were telling me a little bit earlier, you've done, what, 150 screenings at this point, which is remarkable. I mean, Elizabeth, if nothing else, knows how to hustle. And I would imagine—
I learned from the best.
Exactly.
That's right.
You know, the generation that you're focused on here, they're now old enough where their kids would basically be the age of the students sitting out here in the audience. And while not all of your screenings have been in college spaces, I'm sure many of them have been. As you're meeting a younger generation, especially of Asian American kids for whom, again, their parents are represented in that generation, I'm curious, what have been their reactions in your conversations with them? What did they get out of this?
Wow, I will say that has been a huge motivating force. One of my favorite, I've been to a lot of colleges and universities, and I love the young people, and I'm so inspired by them. But one of my top 5 screenings was at a high school, Renaissance High School in Long Beach. Renaissance High School for the arts, the performing arts. And those kids are vulnerable and tender, and they're not afraid to show it. I literally started crying because there were so many kids crying after the screening at me. I was like, I didn't know what to do. They were so like, they wanted to share their hardships with their own parents. And they're like, we're not even immigrants, and this is so hard. I can't believe you went through that. And I'm just, I'm really in awe and inspired by how the younger generations are able to share their vulnerabilities and talk about mental health. And that has been the coolest thing, being on this tour. Beyond like the film festivals and awards and all of that stuff, I would say like meeting with young people in colleges, universities, and high schools makes me want to dig my heels in deeper and say, I gotta keep doing this work.
Something that really struck me, Elizabeth, is like it's a very poignant historical and cultural work, but it's also so personal. Can you talk about how to navigate that? Because it began as something that's not personal and vulnerable, and it became that way maybe, but can you talk about the historical and the very personal?
Yes, that's a great question because it was not personal at first, right? Or I thought, I didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. I just wanted to explore this first generation that had a hard time, and I didn't see myself connected to it. Even though it was like my uncles and aunties, I just thought, well, they're the ones who lived through war. They're the ones who fled by boat. They're the ones that had to rebuild their lives in America and experience racism. Even though I experienced it, I think it was the narratives or the lies that they told me. They're like, you have it so much better. You never have to think about food or shelter or new shoes on the first day of school. But so, any complaint that I had, it was like, zip. So perpetuating this model minority myth. Sorry, getting dry. And so I spent the first few years making that VH1 behind the music. These are the pop stars, the record label owners, the fans. And I thought that film was wonderful, but I felt like there were cracks that kept, I don't know, things were just chipping away at me personally as I was making it, because I was growing in my own, I guess, journey as a mom, and motherhood really kind of broke me. I don't think it's necessary for anybody else, just for me as somebody who, at that point in time, I didn't feel like I had the emotional intelligence. But as I started to understand my role with my daughter, she asked me a question at around 3.5. That's where we were in the film journey, and she asked me where are your parents? Where's your mom? Where's your dad? And the answer I had, like a scripted answer for decades, my whole life. I always had to, and not get choked up or sad about it. Just kind of we don't really talk that much. And your friends, out of respect, we all learn to, you can tell she doesn't want to enter that territory, so people leave you alone. But with my daughter, it was such an innocent question, and it really broke me. People already around me had been asking, this feels so personal. You're very emotional around Ian's story, Linda's story, these other characters that I was interviewing and trying to piece together scenes and their arcs. I'm like, wow, you're every time you talk about them, you get choked up. I was like, I don't know, it's a sad story, right? Well, no, it feels personal. And then they leave me alone. So my daughter was really the last straw, and that clicked. And I had to take a hiatus from the film for a few months before I could work on it again, but I had to do a lot of self-reflection in that moment.
I think that's what makes it so powerful, right?
I hope this isn't too personal to ask, but has your mom seen the film? Has she looked at the book? Have you talked about it with her? What are her feedback, reactions to it?
Well, my mom didn't know she was going to be in the film. I hadn't seen her in 10 years. I like sharing this story in these Q&As because, folks are we find it funny. I was I really didn't think she would make it into the film. I mean, when you don't see somebody for a decade, I had initially just kind of with the recreations and some of these interviews, always hired a DP, and I had my DP ready to go and ended up canceling his flight, a couple of weeks out because it felt weird to be I haven't seen my mom in 10 years. I should bring this white guy with a camera to be right in her face. And I'm like, hey, meet your granddaughter. So I canceled it, and it was my iPhone and my husband, and I barely knew how to use this little Sony camera. So a year and change later, I had to ask her for permission. And she sat on my couch. And I flew her out from Jackson Hole to LA, sat on my couch, and she didn't have a reaction. I was so surprised. And, you know, I don't think she knows really what I do. So she's like, oh, it's like the student film, right? Okay, you can use it. I'm like, okay, cool. Then a few months after that, we like picture locked, and then I flew her out to New York to see it in New York at our world premiere at Tribeca, and that was a whole different story. So I think culturally, and I think really anybody, right? I feel like, yes, culturally Asian people, you know, don't want to share or air their dirty laundry, but it really upset my mom. She sat next to my childhood best friend. She's like, your mom was weeping the whole time. So we've talked about it. I think she's fine. She's resilient. She's been through way more than like seeing a film about her. But I think it hurt because it has been so long, and it has, you know, for us to reconnect and for her to see this POV, I think it's changing something in her though. So I try not to think so much that, you know, it might have hurt my mom in that one moment on that one day, but that they have her granddaughter and my daughter and my mom have a relationship, and that's what's changing for both of them, right? Because without this film, I don't know that we would be connected.
That's so powerful. And just watching that scene of your mom, I keep thinking, that's the shit my mom would say. I wish I could film my mom so she could see what she says to me, you know?
You should. Then like 5 years later, well, now you're in a documentary.
Here's a release form, Mom, by the way.
I'll eat that soup after you sign that.
Oh man. Okay, so a question I've been dying to tell you, but kind of nervous to ask, is it was really heavy to see you interact with your mom and to like unpack really, really heavy things for both of you. And I'm like, but where the fuck is her dad?
Oh man.
So much is on mom, right? And
I need another film. I need another film for the daddy issues.
Why does he get away? You know, like,
There's any producers sitting out there with a lot of cash on hand? You know?
Deep pockets. Let's talk. I'll try to set him up on a, you know.
but from the beginning, you just X him out and put a kind of a emoji, but I don't know, do you mind?
Yeah, I think I'm right now on my mom issues still in therapy, but I'm gonna get to the dad issues at some point. I think that I have suppressed a lot of my emotions, and I have suppressed for an entire lifetime how I feel about my mom, my dad, the PTSD in our household because of all the things that they had been through, and now I'm just really trying to come to peace with the circumstances. Like, nobody chooses war. Nobody chooses this stuff. And I have a little compassion for him, not a lot. You know, I feel like people can change and learn and heal and do better. I feel like I'm not here to like criticize or judge my dad a bunch, but I think that where was he? He just wasn't there. That's the answer. And I've tried to actually talk to him in kind of the same time frame, but there was very little to get out of him because I think like me, I am I'm my parents' kid, and he's suppressed everything, and I don't know if he'll ever uncork, but my mom did. She's also a woman, right? I don't know what that means. I'm not trying to say that she's different.
I'm just going to switch gears to something slightly less heavy. How much, I mean, this is very much, one of the things I really enjoy about the work that you've done here is it is taking us inside of a scene that has a very specific time and place, and a place in which these are about neighborhood and community stories. How much in that Westminster Garden Grove area today, how much of the cultural infrastructure that existed back in the 80s still, like, are there still traces of it? In which ways does it still exist today?
I mean, that's also a really big question. Like, how does it exist? Like, there's still buildings. There's still, you know, shop owners and restaurants.
But I mean, really specific to the music scene, right? Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, that's what you're all around.
Yeah,
That's what
like
we're in the community. Yeah, I don't mean the community as
both
well.
sides.
I mean specifically like that music scene, you know, the recordings, the record stores, the radio stations, the clubs. That's what I mean by the cultural infrastructure.
Oh, that stuff. Well, I want to give a shout out to all the scholars that did document this, because I learned a lot from them. And it's not where it was. You know, it was a necessity in ways where we were not connected the way we are now through social media and online. But yeah, there was one point where there were 35 record labels on like a 2-block strip.
Incredible.
I'm just like 35 record labels on Bolsa. You know, just because there was a mall there. It's called Foot Club Car Asian Garden Mall, and in that mall there were record labels in that mall. And they have a retail storefront, sell CDs, cassette tapes, VHSs, or whatever, some pirated stuff. But there were record labels, and they were, you know, maybe the day the storefront was like the 9 to 5, and the weekends and nights was producing records for these artists in the neighborhood. That's how popular it was. There's so many artists that you didn't even see their faces in this film that probably deserve their own documentaries, and they were very prolific. Like Linda probably had, I'm not joking, thousands of albums made. I'm literally not joking because I know of hundreds. So there's so much I don't know. I can literally point to a catalog and say, oh yeah, they have 1 through whatever. She's on 128 of them. So I know that, and I'm like, there's multiple record labels like that. So she would just go in, you know, people would spend months making albums in Hollywood, right? Because they're like perfecting, they're tweaking. They're like, oh, you know what, we want a violin, we want this, we want that. And it's like, it takes forever to perfect this album. And then they would be like, oh yeah, no, I'd go out on Saturday and finish the album. So, you know, when you hear and you try to judge a recording, you're like, that sounds so tinny. You're like, yeah, because they made it in 6 hours, those 10 songs. You know? Like, there's a guy with a keyboard and then a drum thing, and that was it. So to have learned about that was really cool. But where is it now? That's not the kind of production. They're like churning it out. What I knew about the operations too, this again, all this kind of like research that didn't make it into the film, was that at first they were sending it off to other states where people were duplicating, you know, the cassettes for them or whatever, and then they were like, we want to make more money ourselves, and so they would set up their own distribution, like everything. They would be the manufacturers and the distribution centers, and that's how, you know, busy and bustling it was for the music scene of the diaspora in, you know, like I would say mid-80s to late 90s, and then it all just kind of fell apart with the digitization, the Napster, all of that. And so I feel like there may be less than a few labels around now, and a lot of them are kind of vacuuming up all these defunct record labels and buying libraries.
Okay, that's a quick follow-up. How difficult was it for you to license the music that you did use in the film?
So different.
Ah, okay.
Because they covered a lot of the European artists, I would say like 90% of the 90+% of the music that I used was the European artists, you know, would compose the melodies, write the lyrics, and then like artists like Linda would cover them. And I would have, if I wanted to use it, so we got actual 17 needle drops for the films, but then we had other cases where we were doing fair use, which is like a whole different thing. We didn't have to pay for it, just like recontextualizing how something is used. But for the needle drops, yeah, it took us almost 2 years to figure out how to get them, because they're also in Europe defunct record labels, and other people buy up libraries, and sometimes they only own a piece of that music. So I'm like, oh wait, I have to call somebody in Japan to get to that artist's estate. It was excruciating and painful, and this was a very low budget production.
Doesn't look at that.
Thank you.
Similarly, a lot of the artists were covering major artists. I'm like, is Madonna okay with is Gloria Estefan okay with this? Like, can you maybe talk about the culture of, the Vietnamese covering?
I mean, at first this was the part of the, you don't know what you don't know. I would cringe, because it's Madonna would sing. Linda would sing Madonna's songs. But cover culture is it's in every culture. When we admire somebody, like Frank Sinatra would cover a song by, you name it. Like they did the standards, Ella Fitzgerald, Nina Simone. They would all sing the same songs. They liked it. They admired whoever wrote it. And they were like, this is my own interpretation. So I didn't really think much of it after I learned, you get like fluent in this research and you're like, oh, yeah, everyone does it. It's no big deal. But at first, when you're a teenager, you're like, I want my own Madonna. Why does she have to be called the Vietnamese Madonna? Embarrassing, right? But, Johnny Cash does 9 Inch Nails. You're like, that's so cool. So I think now to think about like people covering other people's music, and we, that happens all the time. Like you listen to something that's sampled, and I don't know. I don't think about it too much now. I'm just like, it just is. It was a fast way to also make a buck because I don't think they cleared the licenses back then. I can like put money on that, but even when you cover an artist, they make money if you upload it now on like DSPs or whatever. Like if I sing a song by Madonna, she gets or whoever wrote those songs will get their royalty, but I get the portion for the performance. So it's still like split up properly. But back then we didn't have these things, so they just make cassette tapes and like nobody gets royalties but us. But we're not talking like millions, right? They're like a success was like we sold 20,000 tapes.
That's why actually still seems kind of impressive by today's standards, maybe not like
That's true, because who's selling like CDs anymore or anything, right? You're like, put your song on Spotify and when it streams 1 million times, you get 2 pennies.
Do we want to take some audience questions maybe? Yeah? What do you folks out there want to ask Elizabeth? Don't be shy now. Yeah, please.
If you don't mind sharing, could you tell us what you got busted for when you got arrested?
Oh my gosh!
So the question here was, what did Elizabeth get busted for when she got arrested in the film?
I want to give a plug to Oliver Wang's book that's outside. It's about car culture, and I don't know, man. I was just a teenager who wanted to like hang out with people who had these cars. You're just like, take me somewhere, just anywhere, please, just away from this. I was not a gangster, but I was a wannabe by affiliation. So I wanted the baggy jeans, I wanted to hang out with my friends, and they're like, this is where we're going. These guys who I didn't know have a car. They're gonna pick us up and take us to the beach. This is this one incident that I thought about for that specific scene. This is actually the second time somebody's asked. So I feel like you get a prize or something for this because it's the least asked question. But yeah, I was with a gang, and a rival gang showed up, and it got really chaotic. I was in Santa Monica, and bats started flying, bottles of Snapple. Does anybody remember Snapple? I just remember like, oh my God, I'm gonna die tonight.
Death by Snapple.
Yeah, death by Snapple. Snapple and bats. And then this all happened at a gas station in Santa Monica. The cars drove off and I was left behind. And the cops came and picked me up. I was detained, so I did not get a record for that. But there were other incidents that I was in that were pretty gnarly. I was just thinking of the one that I got detained for when they did this. And I don't even know why I was with these people. I don't even remember anybody's name except for my girlfriends. Like, didn't know these people and I was risking my life. But you do crazy stuff when you're a teenager with no parental guidance. So listen to your kids. I mean, listen to your parents. Maybe it should be both ways. Listen to your parents, kids.
Other questions? Yeah.
I thought it was interesting to hear the women talk about how hard they had to support these large familial ecosystems, and who gets picked within the family to like your responsibility is to care for everyone. So even Linda talking at the end about, I have to work, I've got to get there, this is what we have to do, right, for survival. But maybe a reflection on the role of women within these families.
So the question was, the question regarding the role of women as caretakers and as providers with
Providers,
this.
yeah.
Well, we do live in a patriarchal society, so I won't break that down because I don't feel totally equipped, but I will say that my mom is the eldest daughter. I think that, I want to say this with a lot of love because I'm still working this out in my head too, emotionally, spiritually. My grandparents just really exploited her. I think that she was a divorcee, and my sister and I were collateral in this. I'll say, as a child, I thought my mom was a hero. You know, she had salons, she had the cars, she got my uncle's cars, she put them through school, I paid my grandparents, put the down payment, paid my grandparents' mortgage every month. I was like, my mom's a baller, you know? While there was nothing being saved, my mom was doing all of this stuff. And I didn't realize, like, you know, it came up very quickly and left, but I wanted to give context that my mom ended up, you know, as a compulsive gambler. And I think that was one way she could spend her money and not feel like she owed anybody anything. And yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, but I just want to say that she was really exploited by my grandparents. And nobody really ever thought about that. It was just kind of a given that my mom was the piggy bank, was the house piggy bank or the house servant. But I don't find it to be uncommon because I've had a lot of conversations screening the film so many times now where people are like, my mom too, I feel seen. Or my family, you know, was the family that got to America and everybody else in the other country, we had to take care of them. So even the kids that were working, you know, they're like, oh, I had a fast food job and I had to give like 50% of my check, you know, which is nothing when you're working at a fast food place, to our parents because they would be sending it back home to wherever. So I feel like I've had a lot of conversations around that and it's really sad.
For me, in my world, I guess like forgiveness is one of the most difficult things to practice in this life. And I noticed that it was difficult for you to forgive your mother in the movie. And just curious, after your interactions with her, were you ever able to forgive her?
Oh, definitely.
Were
That
you
was
able
easy.
to talk to her about forgiving her?
No, it was really easy. I always get choked up because this question does come up a lot, but it still really hurts me.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I really actually enjoy doing this. It's not like you're torturing me. It's like kind of a lifetime of not talking about it. It's like I'm finally kind of just putting it all out there. I couldn't bring myself to forgive her, and now I'm like, oh, the film's done, and now I look at it and I'm just like, oh, that's easy. I think the next part of being in therapy and in conversation with myself and reflecting on a lifetime of this is like, oh, I have to forgive myself because life's short and there's only so much time left now to get to know my mom, to give my daughter a relationship with her. It's not to be like, oh, we're besties now and, you know, 40 years passes and now we're just like, you know, super buds, me and my mom. But it's more like I'm just learning to forgive myself for things I just didn't understand. And that, you know, that's where I'm at now. So forgiving her, you're like, I didn't know, you know, our conversation, I learned that my mom used to sleep in bomb shelters with the whole family, which is, you know, a dirt hole in the ground in Vietnam because they lived in the middle of the country where the most bombs were dropped. So it was just like, oh my God, just, you know, with rodents and whatever. we didn't even talk about those details, but I have to fill in the blanks. So my mom was like, yeah, there were many nights when, you know, the Americans were bombing us overhead and we had to find a place to go. Like, you could have been buried in that dirt hole in the ground, you know? So I just think about that, and I try to just kind of have a lot more, I don't know about empathy, but like just a lot of compassion for everybody in my family, including my dad, you know? That's why I'm like, I don't know, I want him to like be better, and I want all these people to be better, but I think it's more just like, those are some fucked up circumstances that nobody needs to endure. Shit that's happening in our country right now that's leading us down this path. And I come from 3 generations of refugees, right? My great-grandparents from China, my grandparents and my parents from Vietnam, and I'm like, you know, it's always in the back of my head, am I gonna be 4th generation refugee, and then my daughter will be 5th? I don't have, you know, that's a generational wealth beyond things that are material, that's like a spiritual thing that you're like, I've never had more than 2 generations anywhere. That's crazy.
I wanted to ask a question about hairspray. It's like completely different course, but maybe similar, I don't know. So I was really struck by the scene with the Aquanet, and then the story about, you know, sort of spraying yourself with Aquanet at the store, and then just kind of putting the cap back on. And it reminded me a lot about my sister Rosie, who was in a party crew in the 80s in Boyle Heights. Very similar music, kind of like Italo disco, very similar music, and very similar to, like, in terms of just like bands of kids basically, you know, throwing parties. And I wanted to ask, as you're kind of going through the different photographs that were shared when you did your call out, was there anything about the fashion or like the styles, like the hairstyles that kind of stick out to you or maybe are meaningful in some kind of way?
I mean, you saw those hairstyles. Did they stick out? That was all that they did. No. Like these days, I'm like, it's really cool to see a remix of a remix of a remix of a remix. You're like, oh, you want to be Lolita? Like, you know, you want to be punk plus, you know, Edwardian flop or fop, whatever. Just like, okay, I think it's really interesting. But I do feel like the 80s were really unique because it is one of those last generations that there was not a generation that looked like that. And there were obviously sects with S-E-C-T, like people who, you know, had the rainbow version of it, or they had the goth version of the 80s. So there wasn't one look, like there was still kind of like defining categories within it. But it was so unique. It was so uniquely that era. You had elements of it. Everybody had the big hair, but what kind of big hair? Were you like scary big hair? Or like perfected, like, you know, the Houstonian pageant queen big hair, you know, like the Texas women. But I think that the 80s was very unique. I think the 90s, and then it got to the Y2Ks, and I was like, I don't know. I mean, I was in that era, but I felt like it was kind of a remix already. It started to feel like a remix of something that was already done. And now I'm like, everything's just a remix. I find it hard to get dressed myself. Like, what trend? There's no trend. Jeans and a t-shirt. That's a good one. Yeah.
So when you asked if anybody had questions, I mean, this is such a complex film. There's so many questions, and I'd love to be able to ask you hundreds of them, but different things. But one thing in my travels, I'm the director of international programs, and I've spent a lot of time living in Asia, Korea mostly. And one thing that I've noticed I'm not going to speak for the white community, but something that's always troubled me in kind of back to the music scene is that in the covers is that there's a criticism of Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean, Japanese, of people not having creativity. They're just.
So not true.
Exactly. But just wanted to hear some of your comments about if that's ever been raised.
No, at least not for me. I don't know. I just know that we have thousands of years of very rich
Yeah.
cultural history that spans multiple continents, and there's even within, like, I'm Chinese, and it's like, I don't know, that's kind of there's hundreds of dialects of Chinese, so even in that, I'm like, that's so, I never thought about us not having creativity because I exist. Oliver exists, Phung exists. I never think about it. I never think about that. You know, what you think about is the shame of being in this country and they don't want you. And that's when you feel like, oh, my creativity is not wanted. And that sucks. But I never thought, I'm not creative. I literally, that thought has never crossed my mind. It's more, I'm rejected. My work is being rejected. This is not wanted. And that is the pain that you carry with you, and you feel like, maybe I shouldn't even try. But you know the creativity is there. I think that's one thing that, as an unsupervised, without the parental guidance, as a kid, that was one thing I was like, that's why I wanted to hang out with these wannabe, or I wanted to be a wannabe gangster, because these gangster kids were so, with no money, they were so creative. They had the best, hairstyles and clothes. The music they were playing was so fresh, like everything, where we went, what we did. They didn't have to put a painting on a wall to prove their creativity, just they were living creativity, like breathing it. So you're just being rejected. That's where you want to keep proving yourself, but you're like, no, they just don't want your stuff, and they control it. So how will I platform my material?
I think I was thinking about this question earlier, and I feel like you just started talking about it.
I was thinking about this question earlier when you were talking about rebellion, and each generation having its own rebellion, and I feel like you were just talking about it now again too. I think something that I hear that said a lot, and then I think, or I wonder about, at the same time, when there is that rebellion, there's also creation and this generative space. Like when you push something away and when you rebel against the mainstream, you're also creating space you're making space to like create a new culture. And I think that maybe nowadays, when we need rebellion, we have kind of a lot to fight against. We're very focused on that rebellion, but we're not focused on creating something. So that's just something I think about nowadays. It's like, how do you, have you had a lot of thoughts about being generative and creative in those rebellious phases? And then also, like, how do you create that? How do you foster that? What do you do?
I mean, this film and the book, I'm going to give that to Oscar. You have to answer this question.
You mean Oliver?
Oh, sorry, Oscar and Oliver. I got creative right now. My brain.
Like, you have to answer that. How are we creating things in this moment? How are we meeting this moment with creativity?
I mean, what comes to mind is I think the act of creation exists in many ways that are both intentional and unintentional. In other words, it's easy to maybe look at certain kinds of cultural scenes and movements in hindsight and then create an origin narrative to it, which makes it seem as if those things were somehow self-conscious and deliberate. But in a lot of cases, that kind of, especially, youth energy, this goes back to the anecdote that you were saying about all these kind of gangsters that you want to hang out around. They weren't necessarily expressing themselves in a way that I think was necessarily deeply intentional in terms of, I'm being creative with how I'm presenting myself. It's that in the act of rebellion, the very act of rebellion means that you're working against the norms of society. I mean, that's just by definition, that's rebellion, right? And therefore, if we think of creativity as things that you haven't seen before, working against the existing norms of whatever culture or society you're living within is by itself a creative act, regardless of your intention or not. I think this is how things get born. It's not from people sitting down, sketching out on paper, here are my, this is my plan of being creative. It's more that I feel the need to want to do something, whether it's through music or through art or through some kind of visual aspect, whatever.
Protesting at No Kings.
Yeah, is that that energy stems from someplace, and simply because it pushes against whatever the existing status quo is, that is an act of creativity that can then take aesthetic forms in different, very serendipitous, I think, largely unpredictable ways. And I think the history of, just using LA as our example, whether it's this, the new wave scene in Westminster, whether it is about the work I've done around Japanese American car scenes, and again, we can name a gazillion things that's launched here in LA. I think most of those come out of some kind of genesis of a desire to do something different, but not necessarily with the intentionality of, I'm, speaking against, it's not always about, what am I trying to say? It's not always about the desire, the conscious desire to speak truth to power, but again, just by pushing against whatever the status quo is, you are speaking truth to power, whether you know it or not. And then when you have the right mix of things and other people that want to join in you, this is where scenes and movements often derive from. And I don't know if I'm really answering the question.
Do you have something to say to that too?
Absolutely, and how rebellion and creativity are connected because of a reaction to oppression or repression. And just going back to the documentary, like these kids were not only rebelling against their parents, but this white society that didn't want them. And so that's what made this film so beautiful. It's like, well, I'm gonna show you, and there's never been anything like that generation again,
I'm interested in, this isn't fully formed, but there's a way in which Linda's choice to make this kind of music was rebellious, right? Aesthetically somehow. But there's also a way in which it incorporates a lot of mainstream culture that is, how do you say, it's rebellious to her parents, but it's actually someone who is being maybe reductive, I would say that it's kind of aping American culture or white European culture, right, aesthetically. And so I think that this question about whether someone is intentionally being rebellious or creative is interesting to me. I don't have a solution or something, but I think that one thing that's complicated is that sort of some of the subtext of the film is that there needs to be a cycle that's broken through some kind of intentionality. And I see in the film Linda, for example, reproducing a dynamic where she's like, well, I just need to work for my kid. I want to give my kid everything, but she's not giving the kid what the kid needs, which is her presence at his graduation, right? And then I also think, she's at her sandwich restaurant. And there's American flags. There's something non-critical about that seems she's doing something rebellious, but there's something missing there, which is some sort of critical faculty in my mind. And I don't mean that as I'm sorry to cut you off. I don't mean that as a pejorative, but I think what's complicated for me is that it's not so simple as if the subtext of this is they're traumatized by war, people are traumatized by war, which I am too, being American. There's this kind of thing where people, it's been said a couple times today, no one chooses war, but actually people do choose war, right? The American government chooses war, and my parents chose war. They chose South Vietnamese people to side with the Americans who were doing something very obviously wrong in our homeland. I think that is obviously a little bit reductive, but I just feel like there's something missing, and I'm curious if you could speak to that.
Well, you pointed out a number of things, so give me one to just answer the Linda thing. You're like, I don't know how rebellion is because it seems like she was just doing things that American people were doing.
Yeah.
Like Madonna, right?
Sure.
But she wasn't doing it for a white audience, right? So it is innovative. And that's the whole point. It's like an exquisite corpse. We're just adding our verse to the work that's being done. She's inspired.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, I don't know. You tell me somebody who's like a complete original who didn't take from the last generation, right? Like, oh, you came up with the guitar on your own, like you built an instrument, you've never heard this, it's a constant thing, even like electronic music, right? It wasn't just craft work. There's generations, like 100 years before them. I'm not a musicologist. I didn't research this very well, but when I did, I was like, oh, it was there for decades before Kraftwerk was doing that music. Decades, like 5+ decades. Like it was already being built, like how to play with sound waves. And with an intentional for music, right? So this is just how music is, just like you just keep building on what's there. So that's what Linda did, so I find it actually incredibly innovative what she was doing. Like it wasn't a 10-year lag. She was like, I saw it on MTV, I'll try my own version of it and sing in Vietnamese. And actually the Vietnamese lyrics weren't a direct translation. It was just like, whatever's gonna fit in this melody, I'm gonna figure it out. And so people worked with her also to create lyrics that would just fit in there. And they would change the entire meaning of the song. Again, things that didn't end up in the film, so that's part one. Part two, her having an American flag. She's actually a conservative person. But this film is not about her politics, but I think that's what makes her human. And I'm not here to be like, yeah, me too. I'm just saying that just exists in my community. And that's what her beliefs are. They're not mine, but I should definitely portray her the way that she is. So I don't know what you mean by reductive, but I think that it just is who she is. I think 2, with her or 3, her saying like, I'm just doing this for my son, making money or whatever. Like, this film is not your typical Western style film, which often is a hero's journey. One person gets to tell the whole story and you just follow this main character. It's a braid, and it's Linda's narrative, Ian's narrative, and my narrative. And there have been a lot of people who are a little bit more like, I want the American style of telling a film. And they want that, like, what? Why are there so many people? How could there be multiple people, like, in one narrative? And so I read the reviews on Letterboxd. People are like, this movie's such a mess. But I thought that I really, even before I entered the narrative, which was like the first 3-4 years of the filmmaking, I knew it was going to be a community portrait, so there were going to be multiple arcs. And yeah, it was going to be about a community. And for me, Linda represented like a past, like a challenge for her to overcome things. Ian's story is resolved, right? His dad died, but before he dies, he gets that thing that he always wanted, that validation. And for me, the narrative is open. So there's a past, present, and future narrative in each of our stories. And so they don't end up in the same place. And I did not do this on my own. I just was documenting as it was going on. And I worked deeply with my editors, who are incredible people. I worked with 4 editors to get this break. So this is like crazy work, right? So when people judge it or say like, what is this, like if you get to watch it again, you'll see how Linda's narrative unfolds, my narrative unfolds, and Ian's unfolds. So we're really just kind of like informing each other, and also paralleling each other in different places, right? Like how my recognition, it actually is a chronological telling too, because as the story unfolded for Linda, I started to go, I do not like this person. And I say that again with love, as compassion, like, because she reminds me of my mom. Like somebody who's so hard and everything's about money, but she was programmed to be that way, right? And so you can also understand possibly why that represents something for her in that story. And then Ian, same thing, like there was something in him, I was like, I felt a kinship with him, a diaspora kinship with him, that he was estranged from his father and I was estranged from my parents. And so I really wanted to get to know his story. And so anyways, even though it's a documentary, I get to write it as well, because this is something that you, as an artist, as a creative, as somebody who makes or protests or chooses to do things, this is how I chose these stories to end up. I get to write this narrative. There's so many other things that are happening in their lives. This is just a scratch of the surface. So you take from it what you will, but for me, it's a bit of a wish, that I hope people get to reflect on their closest relationships, their found family, and what that means. Maybe even a chance to forgive people that have hurt you. Yeah.
We have 3 left. And I have my 3. I'm sorry, guys.
I
I just want to say thank you for making a work of art that doesn't relate to the war. There's been a lot of Vietnamese works of art or films, etc. that is all just war. So thank you so much for doing that. I feel seen. But I do want to kind of touch on the topic that I am also struggling to figure out as a Vietnamese American. So in Linda, some of her performances, she had the flag with the 3 stripes in the back. That was the Southern, like some history behind that. It's just the flag before the communists took over. But as a Vietnamese firstborn, I was born here, all those stories are pretty distant, kind of similar to the film. How do you relate to the current state of Vietnam? And how do you identify yourself, like heritage-wise?
Well, that was my parents' and grandparents' flag. I look at it as the way Vietnam looks at itself, as a unified country. I think that I don't suffer from those same scars that the people who wanted, let's call it a democracy, in the South and in the North, they wanted something else. I'm not the person to talk about this either in a, super fluid way, but I'll just say that I know that Ho Chi Minh asked America to help them with their rebellion, with their revolution, because they admired America overthrowing the British government. And America said, no, we would like your captives to keep you captive and colonize you and continue on that path. And in this moment, in this country, and I'm like, oh, okay, or any of their flags, but it's the homeland of my parents, and I respect the people that wave it, but it's not my flag.
Thank you. Beautiful film. I wanted to go back and ask you about one of the sub-narratives, which is about your aunt. Was it Myrna?
Oh, my God.
Myra, that's what it was. Thank you. As a child of immigrants, one of the parts of the film that I really resonated with was growing up with aunts that were a little bit older than me, that were really cool, really hip. They introduced me to hip-hop music, and I kind of got the same sense of that relationship between you and your aunts. And so I want to ask you a little bit more about that, and if you felt that just that music connection is also where you kept that relationship going over the years. You seem very close to her overall.
Yeah, we're still very close. We don't agree on politics, just another thing that lives in my family and people I know. But we're very close. Like, I love sharing a meal with her. I'm grateful that I had an auntie, just about a decade older than me that could step in. And the uncles too. They were like, I had a village, and I feel like I'm in that regard, I was very fortunate. I had other people step in to care for me when I didn't have those, the more conventional families. So, music, I didn't think about it very much as a young person, but as somebody now, I'm grateful that my earliest memories are anchored in this. It was fun, it was wild, it was crazy, rebellious, and I'll be thinking about it for the rest of my life. Yeah.
Hi. I'm sorry. I don't know why I stood. I think it's because I'm always so short.
Oh, stand. Take up space.
It was like default. Anyways, thank you so much for such a beautiful film and conversation, and just sharing your vulnerability with us. As someone who is a refugee, grew up in this time period, had those cassette tapes, went to those concerts, had cousins in the SoCal scene, right? All this resonated with me so much, and then just living in Little Saigon now and seeing the posters of the concerts and actually, as someone who grew up in Texas and, was largely a non-immigrant community, mostly, white community actually. It was actually Paris by Night and Linda Chundai and Dan Ho and all them who connected my parents and I, because we could sit down together and watch these videos that had this old school music and had this new stuff, right? And it was liberating for me, right? In terms of just giving some context of what is the cultural, so what your film does is it actually allows us to see what is the cultural barriers and the cultural perception from the Vietnamese community during a particular point in time in terms of the individuals who experienced it, rather than a dominant view of this culture in an anthropological lens, right? And so I really appreciated that. And what it did for me was remind me of the, I said I was going to be short, I'm sorry, girl. It reminded me of, you know, the ways, the particular nuanced ways in which gender was being articulated through this intergenerational conversation in terms of redefining gender and gender roles and gender expectations within our communities. And so it was you were presenting a conversation that was internal in our communities that I really appreciated. And there's this kind of syncretic mimicry that comes out of a colonial and post-colonial context that I also heard you talking about when we were having this conversation about creativity, that then, like you said, within the changed lyrics, actually create something new out of the syncreticness of colonial, you know, diaspora, right? And experiences that have legacies intergenerationally through culture. But I also wanted to say, like, there's this whole, you mentioned this whole repertoire of music and stories that are archived, and is there a public accessibility to the archives, or will there be? And then, just given this conversation, what is the difference for you? Has it been in having a Vietnamese audience versus a predominantly non-Vietnamese audience?
Those were a lot of questions. I'm like, which one should I answer? Can you? Okay, give me one. Give me one in the shortest.
Is there an archive?
There is an archive of ephemera and some archives. I have things. I feel like Azalea or Kelsey or Letty should say something. You have 10 baker's boxes of things I've collected over the years.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So it probably will be here at Cal State LA.
Some of the materials on display on the second floor, Library North. So if you go visit right now, you'll be able to see some of it on display. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Really, it's so special.
That's a good one to end on, right?
And second question. Yes.
Oh,
it's a good
just
one.
kidding.
We'll end on the second question.
Your second question.
The difference between Vietnamese and non-Vietnamese
Perception.
You know, I have not. I did not do that survey, but I love telling this story because I have actually met weepy white cisgen men in audiences. But I love the one that I stayed because I didn't expect it. It was probably my first one. I was earlier in my tour. It was in Berlin, and it was just like this big white dude. And I was like, okay, like very big in Berlin, and he like came up to me, like tears streaming down his face, and I was like, what is he gonna say to me? He has a Vietnamese person in his life, but it wasn't. It was really, it really was kind of like running through my head because I was like talking to people and I saw this guy crying. And then he was like, oh, you really helped me understand my mom more and her relationship with her family because of the Berlin Wall. I guess his mom and his aunt got separated and there were like some family tensions, but he brought that up. So I guess, again, this is like about family dysfunction. Sometimes people look at this film, or often, not sometimes, often people look at this film and they're like, Asian film. You're like, human film. Right? Because if you have it in your heart, whether the person is black, brown, yellow, whatever color, you're not going to be like Asian, non-Asian. So I think that I have been treated in these 150 screenings. I didn't get to go to all of them, but the one, because I kept showing up, I got to find out that wherever you come from, whatever country, whatever gender, whatever persuasion, that people would have something to reflect back at me at these screenings. And yeah, I didn't do the survey of like, oh, you're not Vietnamese, because there were just so many people that came out and shared their similar immigrant journeys or something in their families. I learned all kinds, like so many random things. That was the most beautiful part of being on tour with this film, was like people would start to share things like, my dad's an alcoholic and I feel like I need to revisit this conversation now because I realized that he was a child of immigrants, because they would be like a third generation person but didn't really think about the context of why somebody behaved or had substance abuse issues. So all kinds of, like the gamut of stuff. I was like, oh, I was just, I already had a play therapist to make the film, and then I started to be at these screenings and realized that people really needed to have a space for conversation, and that's what these screenings were doing. So yeah, I said if you were human and you could look past the color of my skin and the language that my elders were speaking, you would just see that there's a lot of pain in our hearts because of circumstances we could not control.
I need to wrap it up because I feel like I want to keep, talking about the film and just unpacking it. But it is time to conclude, and thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for the screening. Thank you very much. Elizabeth, Oliver, we really appreciate you engaging in this conversation, helping us to unpack everything about your beautiful film. And so, with a lot of appreciation from the Cal State LA Library, Special Collections, thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for having us. Thanks for coming and spending the afternoon with us. Oliver has some books outside, so do I. If you want them, we'll be there. And thank you again. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Yes, just a quick reminder, if you come right out here, you'll see the book sale. Please, pick up Oliver's book, fantastic book, and Elizabeth's book. And if you would like, join us tomorrow for our research symposium.